Hi, and welcome to Something to Talk About. I'm Linda McNamee, and for the next hour, we are going to learn a little bit about understanding, appreciating, and just how to be nice to each other, I think is a good way to say it. But anyway, before we begin, I would like to remind you that you can always email me at talk@bcattv.org. We are not live this episode, so you will not be able to call us, so email is your best chance of getting a hold of me, especially if you have a suggestion for a future topic or a question for our guest, whom you will meet momentarily. As always, I would like to thank the crew for today. We have Chris Flaherty and John Vayas, who are staff members here, making sure that us volunteers keep the place functional and, don't burn it down or anything. Not that we have. But anyway, I would also like to thank Jolie Atwood and Stephanie Floridas, who have given up their Wednesday to come hang out at BCAT and help me out as well. And last but definitely not least, I would like to thank my husband Paul for staying home for Daddy Date Night. Hope homework is done. Welcome back to school. Thanks. Okay, now I would like to introduce you to my wonderful guest. We have Corey Prachniak-Rincon, who has a lot of initials after your name. Very impressive. And you are the director of the Massachusetts Commission on LGBTQ Youth. Wow. Okay. That's quite a mouthful. Anyway, before we get into your job, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, where you went to school, what made you come to the greater Boston area?
Yeah, thanks. So thanks for having me. It's great to be on. I grew up not too far away in southeastern Connecticut, so the Red Sox side of the state.
Excellent.
Thank
you for that plug.
Of course, got to make sure that's clear from the start. And I moved up here about 4 years ago to be closer to my family, who's based out in Westboro.
Oh, okay.
Before that, I had been in school and then working in D.C., and I also went to school briefly when I first moved here to Boston. So,
Gee, I wonder if there's any colleges or universities around here. No, kidding. So, you're a lawyer, right?
Yep, I have a law degree.
In there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wow. So, what made you decide that you wanted to work with the LGBTQ community, and after that, then we can go into telling me about the commission?
Yeah, well, I'm a member of the community myself, so I understood a lot of the issues and the need to have things get done. When I first graduated from law school in DC, even before I graduated, when I was studying law, I was doing a lot of work in the LGBTQ community there. And it made me really think highly of doing, work for the public good.
Okay.
I didn't really have any strong aspirations to go off and do corporate law or anything like that,
No.
because I got spoiled really early on getting to do work on the community level with a great organization in DC.
Okay.
And I think just seeing how much, at that point I had clients as an attorney, and was helping them with individual cases, and just seeing the problems that existed on a systemic level.
Oh, okay.
That's what made me want to get more involved in the policy side, which is what I do now. With the commission here, I don't represent clients. We don't provide
So you're more
representation.
Of an advisory role type.
Yeah,
Okay.
The commission advises the state. We issue policy recommendations. We work to implement changes to the law and regulations. So that's what we do.
Cool. So tell me a little bit more about the commission, because until I did a little Google search, I did not know that there was a commission.
Yeah, we're great, kept secret for much of the state.
We need to change that.
We're always working on that. The commission's actually been around for a while. So the commission was originally founded 27 years ago.
Wow. Okay.
By Governor William Weld. And his reasoning for doing so was because he had been informed about the high rate of bullying that was facing youth at that time, just referred to as gay and lesbian youth.
Okay. And this was before the whole cyberbullying thing kicked in, too.
This was before there really was much of a cyber.
Yeah, there wasn't a cyber thing.
Yeah.
If you had email, it was like, ooh.
Yeah, different times for sure. But, even so, a lot of bullying existing within the school building and a lot of negative mental health outcomes resulting from that, including, suicidal contemplation and attempt by youth who, again, at that point, they were talking mostly about lesbian and gay youth. So Governor Weld, decided to take action and form a governor's commission.
Okay.
And that commission, advised the governor, examined what policies could be changed to make things better, and helped to start a program to conduct work in schools to reduce bullying. And that program still exists under the commission's leadership today.
So you mentioned, I lost the thought, but it was like changing legislation. Was it changing existing legislation or introducing new? Because I don't remember any laws or rules or anything around bullying even existing back then.
Mm-hmm. So the commission's role is to educate. So because we're part of the state government, so we're not an advocacy organization.
Okay.
We're also not part of the legislature. So we kind of sit in an interesting position where our role is really to help educate the legislature and the public around what could be done to improve things for LGBTQ youth.
So two questions. What age are we considering youth? Does it start at like middle school and high school, or do you see the issues entering at a lower age as well, like elementary?
Yeah, we're increasingly seeing issues coming up and schools wanting our support from the elementary school level or even the preschool level.
Preschool?
And that's because,
Okay.
The schools are dealing with issues of youth encountering differences in how they present their gender or express their gender. And so it may not be something that's necessarily LGBTQ strictly speaking, but it's youth who are who for whatever reason with the way that they feel about their gender or that they express their gender, that the school feels like they need to mediate that in a positive way.
Okay. I thought preschoolers were just trying to figure out, which end of the pencil to use instead of, oh, wow. Okay. Now you also mentioned educate the community. How are some of the ways that you do that?
Well, when the commission was, in 2006, we were reformed from a governor's commission to an independent commission established by the legislature.
Okay.
So at that point, our structure changed, whereas in the past, the members were appointed by the governor. Now, since 2006, the members have been appointed by a bunch of community and professional organizations that are set in our legislation.
Oh, okay.
So the commission itself has 50 members, which is very large for a state commission.
Yeah.
And unlike most state commissions, generally for a state commission, you'll see that the people who are filling the seats on the commission are elected officials or members of the legislature or high-ranking people within the state government. And in our case, all of the people are appointed by community and professional organizations. So things like teachers' unions, the American Association of Pediatrics, Massachusetts chapter, local organizations, LGBTQ nonprofits. So we really are a very community-driven commission.
But all these other organizations are just serving to help advise, or is there like a sponsorship involved?
So their role is to appoint members onto the commission, and then the people who they select will, as well as we also have elected seats on the commission. So together, those 50 people who are selected to be the commission, they collectively make the big decisions around, what policies they want to promote, what priorities they want to set, and that kind of thing.
Okay. So there are a bunch of initials in there. So LGBTQ, I'm sorry, I really need to look at this. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, or the LGB, that relates to sexual preference or sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm.
Then the T is transgender, and then the Q is queer.
Q can be queer or questioning.
Or questioning.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Can be both or either.
So that tends to be more of like sexual identity. So can we just kind of clarify those definitions a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So generally, lesbian, gay, bisexual, those are terms that describe someone's sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm. Those just seem to be around for a lot longer, so everybody kind of knows what they mean.
Yep, they definitely have been around for longer, especially in kind of common usage. The Q, as I said, can be questioning, which is especially applicable for youth who maybe just, are still kind of figuring out their identity. And that can apply to sexual orientation or gender identity.
Okay.
And so gender identity, when we say gender identity, we mean that the gender that one identifies with.
Okay.
And so
not necessarily the gender assigned at birth.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
And so transgender is a term related to gender identity. Okay. So a person who's transgender is generally someone whose gender identity doesn't match the sex that they were assigned at birth.
Okay.
So that's a separate concept. And so for transgender people, they could be lesbian, gay, bisexual, or heterosexual, or something else.
Okay. I'm just looking at my next question, and I'm like trying to figure out a way to phrase it. June was Pride Month, or is Pride Month, and a lot of communities had gay pride parades. Do you see the parades and the publicity that gets helping the community, or do you see it more as a potential for targeting with a lot of hate that is still around in today's society? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I think that on the whole, these events are really important and they're a really positive thing.
Okay.
In part because LGBTQ people are existing, whether or not there's a parade to show it.
Right.
And so, we're going to, sometimes experience discrimination or stigma, whether or not there's something. So, the fact that we can have a parade or a resource fair or another event, is a way to, first of all, bring people together, show them that they're not alone, which I think is especially important for young people. Okay. It's a way for them to get connected to organizations and services that can support them.
Oh, okay.
And, it's also a way to kind of to reinforce that there is public support, So
okay.
There may sometimes be backlash, and that's unfortunate. Of course,
we're working at eliminating or reducing.
Yeah, and I mean, people are free to share their opinions and have their own events that express their views, as long as it's done in a respectful way. Then everyone's free to have their opinion. But I think in general, these events are a really positive thing for the communities that they happen in.
Okay. Now, we use the term gender equality a lot. What does that mean for the LGBTQ community?
I think in some ways, gender equality means the same thing for the LGBTQ community. Okay. Interestingly, with the numbers that we look at for high school students, which is the main data that the commission uses to look at LGBTQ youth in the state, there is about twice as many LGBTQ girls as there are LGBTQ boys.
Really?
And this is based on how the youth self-identifies. So, it doesn't capture exactly youth who may not identify as male or female. It doesn't really tell us for transgender youth exactly where they fall there. But as a general statement, there's about twice as many LGBTQ girls as boys. Okay. And so I think, we often can kind of forget about that. It's not really intuitive, but it really reinforces the fact that if there's, for example, still a pay gap between men and women, then that's going to impact LGBTQ girls and young women and women as well. So I think that a lot of the issues are the same, and there's just kind of this added level of complexity of making sure that, when we're talking about gender equality, that it's being inclusive of people of all genders and it's being inclusive of people of all sexual orientations.
Okay. Wouldn't it be nice if it just wasn't an issue? It's all I kept thinking when I'm doing these questions. I'm writing these questions. I'm like, why does it have to be an issue? Now, within the LGBTQ community, have there been any studies to see if there's different treatment among the different initials or the different subcategories of the community?
Yeah, we definitely see much higher levels of discrimination and negative health and socioeconomic outcomes for transgender youth.
Okay.
And also youth who identify as non-binary, which means they don't identify as male or female exclusively.
Okay.
For those youth, as well as for bisexual youth. For bisexual youth and adults compared to lesbian and gay folks, there's a disparity there as well, where they tend to face worse health outcomes. They have more instances of discrimination, problems accessing services, and that kind of thing.
Oh, wow. Okay. Did not expect that as an answer, but that was pretty cool. There seems to be a change in people's attitudes toward the sexual orientation of individuals over the past couple of years, at least in my sheltered little world. Has that really been changing, or is it just my false perception?
I think that there has definitely been, a huge shift in the cultural attitudes and perceptions of folks. I think that it hasn't been equally impactful for all parts of the community.
Okay.
So, for example, I think that for youth, which is obviously the focus of the commission, the youth haven't necessarily benefited as much from some of things like same-sex marriage, for example.
Okay.
That's not going to have a huge impact for youth.
Okay.
And so, I think that sometimes some of the progress that's been made doesn't automatically apply down to youth.
Okay.
It certainly has some some positive impacts, and youth can see that adults who identify like they do are getting more rights and more support and more opportunities.
Okay.
But I definitely think we have to stay vigilant because while there has been a lot of progress, there's still a lot of need for support.
Okay. Now, what are some of the issues with the middle school, high school aged kids?
Well, we see we track quite a bit of data.
Yeah, I know that was a pretty wide scope of a question, but
we track quite a bit.
Okay.
So some of the big issues that we see are definitely higher rates of bullying.
okay.
We see higher rates of getting threatened or injured with a weapon at school. Higher rates of skipping school because the youth does not feel safe in the school building.
Understandable.
With those, given those other factors, yeah, of
exactly.
course.
I'm like, yeah.
Yep. So that's unfortunate. We see higher rates of mental health issues, including suicidal contemplation and attempt. And then we see other issues like higher rates of homelessness among LGBTQ youth.
Okay. Why the homelessness?
There's a lot of reasons that can play into it, and unfortunately, a lot of the data that we look at, in general in scientific research, it's really hard to get at the root cause of something.
Okay.
So we can kind of surmise based on what studies are available, and what we do know is that it may be that the youth feels rejected by their family, or just may not feel as supported or welcomed there, even if it's not explicitly related to their LGBTQ identity. And there's also, when we think about some of the other reasons that lead people to experiencing homelessness, some of those reasons include things like truancy for youth. So if LGBTQ youth are skipping school because they don't feel safe, that's going to make them more likely to end up experiencing homelessness. As well as with mental health, we know that a lot of folks who have mental health issues, that can contribute to homelessness as well.
Okay.
So it's a lot of these problems kind of feeding into each other. So it's really hard with any research to get kind of an exact correlation with here's the exact, this is 10% of the cause, this is 20%. but we see a lot of those factors as, likely contributing to those disparities.
Okay. Can we talk a little bit more about family dynamics? Whether it's a youth afraid to admit gender identity or sexual orientation, or afterwards, or how has that played a role in what the commission does, or just in society in general?
Yeah, we are definitely looking a lot more at issues of family acceptance lately. That's been one of our big takeaways from kind of upping our research a few years ago. Was just realizing how many of the issues that the commission works on relate back in one way or another to experiences within the family. So it's something that we're starting to pay a lot more attention to and trying to figure out how the commission can support families and how we can recommend other state agencies to better support families that are working through these issues.
Okay.
We do, one of the questions that the state asks in the annual survey that it does for high schoolers is how comfortable the youth feel going to an adult in their family to talk about something that's important to them.
Okay.
And we see that LGBTQ youth are less likely to say, yes, I can go home and talk to my parent about things that matter to me. Okay. So, we see that as being a challenge that population faces.
What are some of the resources that the commission provides? I mean, once you find all this information on the survey, what do you do with that, and how do you fix it?
So part of our role is to work in the policy sphere,
Okay.
which is trying to change kind of the big picture, although it doesn't always mean meaningful change on the day-to-day level until people
Okay.
start to see those policies. But one of the things that we do is to co-sponsor with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education a program called the Safe Schools Program for LGBTQ students.
Okay.
And so with that program, we do about 200 trainings and technical assistance sessions a year for public schools.
Okay.
So any public school can apply on our website to have a training or some kind of a technical assistance session provided for free.
Okay.
And we also run a statewide network of student leaders at their schools, who are active with their GSAs. Used to be Gay Straight Alliance. Now most of the students use Gender and Sexuality Alliance.
Okay.
So we have a leadership network that we provide for students,
Okay.
so that we can help them to be leaders and advocates in their own, school building for other youth.
Okay. Now, do you find do you find that all schools are buying into this, or do you see certain geographic areas that are like a little more on the conservative side, I guess, and not willing to embrace the education?
We definitely see a big mix in responses, but I would say it's not necessarily geographic based. So I think that there are lots of areas where that may surprise you, where you may not think that there's a lot of LGBTQ people there, or you may not think that they would be as open-minded. And it's really
more of the latter.
and really that's kind of not what we see. I think we see that all over the state, even in areas that may not have as much of an open out LGBTQ community, there are oftentimes people who are really open to helping those students who do identify that way.
Okay. Now, one of the side conversations we had via email was the idea of pronouns. And the English language is kind of geared for, standard male, standard female, as most languages are around the world. Actually, I'm trying to formulate a question, but it keeps popping into my head that I think I just read an article that Sweden actually created a gender-neutral pronoun that's slowly being introduced to society, and they're mapping. How do you see pronoun usage in the English language now being used? And do you ever see America as a society creating a new word?
Yeah, great question. I think that we I think maybe we as adults don't even need to wait for our country as a whole to adopt something, because the youth are already doing it. In particular,
Do you need a good word?
yeah, I mean, I think that youth are in general, they're much more open-minded, and they make things happen. So I think we see a lot of youth, in particular, certainly people of all ages. There are people who use pronouns other than he and she, but I think especially among the youth, we see youth coming forward with how they want to identify, and in general, getting a lot of support from their peers and from their schools. It's funny because I think, something like they, them, theirs pronouns.
Okay. They're plural, and it just, the structure of the English language just messes with my brain.
It can be tricky for people, but I think the funny thing is that we often use these pronouns in a gender-neutral way when we're not thinking about it. So, for example, we need to tell this person that their food is ready, or someone left their phone on the table. We know it's not a group of people who left a shared phone. We know it's one person, but because we don't know the gender, we automatically say their phone or something along those lines. So part of it, I think, is that we overthink things as people.
I tend to do that.
I do it myself, so I totally relate to that. And I think that it's like anything that once you practice doing it, that it becomes second nature pretty quickly.
Because I've noticed, I noticed it on your email signature, but I'm also involved in Girl Scouts, and everybody that I've contacted through the council always has that same signature, preferred pronouns. And I'm wondering, is that trend kind of catching on? Is it just within certain communities, or do you think it's the overall society as a whole that's adopting these practices?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a growing trend. I think that, partially it's a way of kind of showing your own openness, to say, if I'm willing to share my pronouns with you, then it lets you know that it's safe for you to share your pronouns with me.
Oh, okay.
And it's also a good way to kind of show solidarity with people in your office who maybe people make wrong assumptions about their gender pronouns. So if everyone in the office has pronouns in their signature, at least everyone who feels comfortable doing it, then that's a way of kind of building some solidarity for other people. So it's definitely one of the things that we recommend for places that feel like they're ready to take that step. And we've issued some kind of guidance on how state offices in particular can accomplish this.
Okay. Now, what are some of the other ways that the Commission suggests for growing acceptance of the LGBTQ community? Yeah,
well, one of the big things that we look at is, of course, health and health education. So I think, we have a situation right now in the state where schools are doing very different things around educating their students on health. There's not much like structure,
standardization, or structure.
Exactly. Yeah. So there right now it's not mandatory for schools to teach health at all. And
what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
Sense sarcasm.
I mean, I think it's probably most of us would agree it's pretty important. And so of course there's questions about how to get it done, and we don't want to add more requirements to schools without also supporting them and meeting those requirements. But I think in general, it's a great goal for the state to make sure that all students are receiving health education. And then once they are receiving health education, that it's inclusive of all students and all aspects of their, physical, emotional, and social health. And so that's one of the big issues that we work on.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, we have
Keep
quite
going.
a bit. I have a
Keep
list
going.
here.
Why not? I would like,
So I will say that we have our whole recommendations are available online on our website.
Oh, okay.
So it's about 100 pages long. We issue.
So you don't want to print it out, or you'd kill a few hundred trees.
Yep, be green and download the PDF. But we have recommendations that we issue to 17 different state agencies.
Okay.
And then we issue kind of bigger recommendations to the legislature as well around what we think that the legislature and the governor can do.
Now, do you actually write the bills and write the laws, or do you just recommend we need something that covers this, this, and this, and you write it?
Yeah, that usually it's the latter, not because we don't like writing or because we're lazy, but our role is really to educate the state. Because
you've got a law degree. I mean, you could do it probably better than some of the legislators.
I don't know about that, but I think the idea is that we have a narrow focus, and we're not the experts in everything, but the commission, we're the experts in this subject, so. Our role is really to advise and to say to the State House, we think it'd be great if there, was, kind of more in our bullying law, more specifics for what should be done to address bullying in schools.
Okay.
So, we're not elected officials to go in and say, okay, let's sit down and write the law. We're just advising from the perspective of LGBTQ youth, here's what we see as being, important for this population.
Things I forgot from my 6th grade civics class. So I'm also, when I was thinking about, do you have any more?
Recommendations?
Any more recommendations?
So some of the other highlights that we haven't touched on yet, one thing is working on training, so providing training opportunities.
To whom?
We're specifically looking at state employees. So we kind of, we're also looking at folks who work in schools. We're already providing free trainings to schools that want to do that. And, we recommend that there be even more of that occurring. But one thing that we're looking at separately is trying to train state employees in basic LGBTQ competency.
Okay.
We are doing a lot around supporting homeless youth because we know that youth who are experiencing homelessness are disproportionately likely to be LGBTQ.
Okay.
And so we want to make sure that LGBTQ youth are being kind of included in what's going on to address homelessness. There's been a lot of momentum in the state over the past few years to ending homelessness for youth and young adults. So we're trying to support those efforts. We've also been working on other aspects of healthcare beyond what we talked about with health education, to also look at funding for HIV programming and other aspects of health, including mental health access.
Okay, so a lot of this sounds like it's not limited to the LGBTQ community. It seems like everybody could benefit from some of these strategies that you're introducing.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that a small minority of the things that we work on are LGBTQ specific issues. And most of them are issues that are impacting a lot of youth or all youth. And, we're just making sure that that the issues of LGBTQ youth are being included, and that, also that we're bringing more people to the table who may not otherwise be part of that conversation.
Okay. Where is all the funding for this coming? Is it all state funding, or do you have grant funding? Or I know you mentioned partnerships with the Teachers Association and everything. I mean, how do you currently operate, as well as how do you expand the programs? I mean, yeah.
So the commission is funded by the state.
Okay.
But our members are all volunteers. So we have 50 people who sit on the commission. Those are all volunteers, giving their time. A lot of them
Which
with
is
the support.
A lot.
Yeah. Time is valuable for everyone. So we have to as an employee, I give a lot of thanks to the volunteers who are making a lot of this work happen.
So you don't have to do the work of 51 people.
Yeah, well, it's the great thing about having such a large commission is that we have a lot of different voices, perspectives, identities all coming together, which you could never accomplish with just a small staff who's kind of running the show on the ground. So, we definitely are able to accomplish a lot of what we do because we have such a big and dynamic group of volunteers who are giving all of their brain power and using their networks to do the work that we do.
My next few questions deal with equality. And everybody, or not everybody, but it seems like the trend is equal opportunity, equal everything, equal rights, equal pay. That doesn't, and some members of the community are scared by that, but equal doesn't necessarily mean identical. It just, how do you explain in the commission's work that they're not the same?
Mm-hmm.
Equal doesn't always mean, everybody gets treated the same.
Yeah, so I think that this is part of the shift that the LGBTQ rights movement has kind of gone through.
Okay.
I think that there was kind of this framing around equal rights for everyone, which
It's not pie. Yeah. Sorry, that graphic always makes me laugh. Okay.
yeah, I mean, I think that there was this idea of equal rights. I think that idea was not the most realistic for actually achieving the society that we want to see.
Okay.
I think that it worked well for people who were generally pretty well off in life, and all they needed was to be able to marry their same-sex partner or that kind of thing, but who otherwise everything was already working well for them in society.
Okay.
I think for folks who have other challenges in particular, that just having equal rights isn't going to cut it.
Right.
And really what we talk more about as a commission is equity versus equality.
Okay. Yeah, tell me more about educating people on the difference of that.
Yeah, so kind of the kind of stereotypical image for one versus the other is equality is we're all going to go to a baseball game. We have to look up over the fence, so everyone gets a box this size.
Oh yeah, that's the graphic that I'm thinking. Okay.
And equity is if someone's a little bit shorter, they get a little higher of a box. If someone's taller, they may not need a box at all.
So everybody gets the right size box to look over the fence.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's equity.
That's equity.
Got it. As opposed to equity that you get at a bank, which. How do you change the minds of individuals? There's, especially in, I don't want to go political, but it just seems like in the current political atmosphere, there seems to be a lot of hate. How do you contradict that? And how do you fix that? Can you fix that?
Well, I don't know if we can fix all of it. I think that, I think that people are affected in different ways. I think that there are people who you can convince with numbers and with data. So we certainly provide a lot of data to show that LGBTQ youth are struggling in a lot of ways, and we provide the research to show here's what science says is best for these youth and what will make them well positioned to be successful and happy and healthy in life.
Okay.
So there's the science kind of, logical brain part of it. And then there's the heart part, which is, more sharing stories. I think helping people to understand, that they have LGBTQ people in their offices, in their classes, wherever they are, And so I think that's, been probably the bigger driver of change in our culture. I don't know for sure, but if I had to guess, I would say more people have been changed because, they have a relative who came out or a friend who came out versus, just reading through kind of data and that kind of thing.
Analysis, yeah. Statistical analysis doesn't always change opinions.
No, not always.
Well, I'm trying to read through those, but I'm going to skip that for now. The topic of our discussion is suicide. How does suicide rates or suicide attempts compare within the LGBTQ community versus the overall community? And what are some of the resources, or is there anything we can do to fix that? Because any life should be worth holding on to.
Yeah, great question. It's a tough subject for a lot of people to discuss. September is Suicide Prevention Month, so it's a good time for us to be having this discussion. LGBTQ youth, the data that we have shows that these youth are about 3 times as likely to contemplate suicide as their peers.
Okay.
And they're almost 4 times as likely to actually make a suicide attempt.
Okay. Now, I'm sorry for interrupting, but with that statistic, is that before or after they come out as being a member of the LGBTQ community? Has that been, because I'm thinking if someone is denying who they are, that would put them in a pretty big depression, and they'd want, I don't know, I would think that would direct them more toward the suicide attempt path than if they did come out and they were starting to live their lives the way they feel they should.
Mm-hmm.
Or has there been any analysis on that, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of research done on this,
Okay.
not specific to the data that we analyze, because our data is really limited to, it doesn't go into when things happened or why they
Okay.
happened.
Just that they happened.
Just that they
Okay.
happened. But there's been a lot of other studies that go into this.
Mm-hmm.
In general, what the research shows is that someone who is not publicly identifying with how they feel inside, that
Okay.
person is particularly susceptible to negative mental health outcomes like depression or suicidality, because they have that conflict, and because they're trying to struggle. They're struggling with that. They're not able to kind of live openly as they feel.
Okay.
With that said, coming out for a youth doesn't automatically flip a switch and everything's all better, because unfortunately when they do come out, they're likely to encounter at least some level of stigma, discrimination. They may be rejected, and even if they aren't, those issues are still hard to navigate. So I think, when folks think back to their own adolescence, there were probably a lot of issues that now don't even seem like a big deal, but that at the time were really difficult for that person to go through.
Okay.
And so I think that, in this situation, for these youth who come out, even best case scenario in which everyone is pretty supportive, it's still a lot for that person to work through.
Okay. So does the commission provide any assistance, or what are the resources that are available to prevent or to reduce the rates of suicide in the LGBTQ community?
So one thing that, the one great resource as an example is the Trevor Project. They do work specifically around LGBTQ youth and addressing suicide risk.
Okay, tell me a little bit more about the Trevor Project in general. I kind of recognize the name, but I don't remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're a national nonprofit. They have a hotline that youth or their advocates can call, and they have lots of resources on their website as well. So it's a great, referral for someone who's really struggling and kind of needs some immediate help.
Okay.
We have a whole map of resources specific to Massachusetts that folks can check out off of our website and look in their local area for local resources that exist, including things like LGBTQ youth drop-in centers or, mental health providers and that kind of thing. And then, of course, the work that we do in schools, what we're trying to do is make sure that there are adults in the building who are able to address issues of bullying that they see, but who are also able to help youth, with referrals. So they can, if they see that a youth is struggling, they kind of know how to talk to that youth. They know where they can, send them. We work with training nurses and,
signs that you train them to look for, like signs and symptoms to get ahead of it, or is it more like reactive?
Well, we try to work on addressing the overall climate in the school.
Okay.
So I think that kind of gets to the getting ahead of things where,
Okay.
what a lot of schools want and what we try to support them in doing is where we're not just addressing instances of bullying that are occurring, but we're trying to make an overall more positive,
Cultural
healthy school
environment.
culture.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. Any more thoughts on suicide? We gotta come up with something.
Yeah, I would say that one of the other just kind of troubling things that we see in the data that I think is a really strong call to action is that the disparity between LGBTQ youth and other youth actually grows between suicidal contemplation and attempt, which means that non-LGBTQ youth are more likely to de-escalate and to find a resource, find the support that they need to not go from contemplating to attempting suicide.
Okay.
And LGBTQ youth are less likely to find that resource or that support that they need.
Okay.
And when we look within different subgroups within the LGBTQ population, this problem repeats itself. So, for example, LGBTQ youth of color in the state are, in general, as likely or even a little less likely than white LGBTQ youth to consider suicide, but they are more likely to make a suicide attempt. Which means that for youth of color, they're not finding those tools or that help that they need when they're contemplating suicide. And the same thing is true for transgender youth, where transgender youth, they're more likely than lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth to contemplate suicide, but the gap grows even more when we're looking at attempt. So all of these things are just kind of signs that these youth, LGBTQ youth in general, and especially youth of color and trans youth, are not getting the support that they need when they're first encountering, these mental health problems, and that really tells us that we need more interventions, we need more support for youth who are struggling.
Okay. Do you see any socioeconomic ties to the suicide rates at all?
We haven't looked at socioeconomic status directly, but as I mentioned, we do look at race and ethnicity, and so we know that youth of color in the Commonwealth are much more likely to have.
I don't mean to stereotype, but it seems like ethnic minorities tend to be on a different socioeconomic than your standard white person. So I'm just wondering if there was any analysis done there.
I think that part of it definitely can have to do with healthcare access and the fact that lower income families have a lot harder time finding mental health care in particular. There's long wait lists for people that are on public health care. There's just a dearth of options, especially in rural areas. I think that socioeconomic status does play into this because lower income families have a really hard time finding the help that they need.
Okay, all right. So are these the same resources for just like not simple, but anxiety and depression? Because it seems to me, and again, the uneducated, that anxiety and depression would precede the thoughts of suicide. So what are the options available to counteract the anxiety and depression that LGBTQ youth might encounter?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of the same things that are true for all youth. So things like having a therapist that they can talk to, possibly other healthcare options like medication if that's what's necessary. But I think that beyond kind of that standard answer for LGBTQ youth, it's also having a sense of community. It's having someone role models that they can kind of look up to,
Okay.
either in the media or in person, people that they know that they can talk to and
Okay.
talk through their problems. So that's what a lot of LGBTQ youth serving organizations are really
Okay.
focused on, is having peer support, peer mentoring, having a community center where the youth can come, having adult mentors who can come in,
Okay.
all of those kinds of support, so that the youth feels more connected and like they have people that they can
Okay.
talk to. I
They
think
feel
those
less
are
alone.
exactly.
Oh, okay. So, actually, when we were talking about bullying, how has cyberbullying changed what's going on in either, either the LGBTQ community or society as a whole? I think I
Yeah,
kind of know society as a whole, but
we see about the same levels of bullying and about the same disparities that we do with
okay.
cyberbullying than we do with school-based bullying.
Okay.
So I think that it's really just escalated the problem, and it's made it so that the internet and everything is really a double-edged sword for LGBTQ youth. There is a lot of support that a lot of research that shows that
Okay.
having having the internet and all of the social networks that we have
Okay.
access to is a positive thing for LGBTQ youth, because they can find resources, they can find people who they can talk to, who
Okay.
have shared experiences. But then, of course, on the flip side of that, we have things like cyberbullying, where youth are just susceptible to more. People can do things anonymously, or send a message that goes to the whole school at once.
Oh, okay.
So obviously it's intensified bullying, and really intensified the need to have positive school cultures, where
Okay.
because we can't you can't stop students from doing everything, and you can't students can send a text and it can be around the school. It can be off school grounds, it can be after school hours. So really
Right.
what we need to do is
It's like 24/7.
yeah, of course, and you're never going to be able to like police that. So
Right.
the alternative is create more inclusive school environments where folks don't feel the need to express themselves in that way.
Okay.
So I think that cyberbullying and all of that has just kind of doubled down on all of the needs that we already had before that problem existed.
Okay. Now, we only have a few minutes left, and I know we touched upon this a little bit, but what are what are some of the ways that LGBTQ youth are making positive contributions within the community? Let's end on a happier note here.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there there's so much going on with our youth in general. I think we see youth around the country stepping it up and really pushing adults to get things done on different issues.
Get your act,
Yeah, totally. And I think that we really see that strongly with LGBTQ youth here in the Commonwealth.
Okay.
We, as I mentioned, we run a statewide network of student leaders,
Okay.
and they are, our group. We have regional councils, and we have a statewide council.
Okay.
We have a lot of students that are part of this program,
Okay.
and they are really dedicated to advocating for better policies in their schools and in the state. So we've had, they've been working on things like reducing homelessness, reforming the juvenile justice system, improving health education and sexual health education in particular in schools. And it's great because there's been a lot of research to show that what really makes a difference for LGBTQ youth isn't just going and sitting in a GSA meeting, but actually taking a leadership role and showing advocacy skills, and that those students are the ones who have the best health outcomes. So it's really a win for everyone. We have youth who are really caring about their communities and are engaging in issues through this kind of connectedness that they otherwise wouldn't have. They're working on important issues, and it also is evidence-based way of making sure that they're going to have good outcomes in their own lives.
Okay. Now, does the commission help them figure out the ways? Because I know when I was in high school, I would not know the least bit about making real change in my community.
Yeah, we help a little bit. We
Is
actually
it through the training program that you do, or?
Yeah, so we just finished in August. We had about 40 student leaders come to a summit where they got training. Part of what they learned is about the legislative process. They learned about just working productively in their schools on school-based policies. And then those students will go out into all of their regions, and they will run the regional meetings and help to train their their peers in their regional level. And they'll come back every other month to the state level to get ongoing kind of support from us. And we don't tell them, here are the issues you should work on. The students, that's totally driven by them.
So they come up and say, we have these issues we want to work on. How do we do this?
Exactly. And we can help to support them to say, okay, homelessness is important to you. That's great. Here's some of the ways that you could work on, making sure that students at your school aren't going to experience homelessness.
Okay. So there is a regular follow-up where, I know Massachusetts isn't a big state, but when you're spread out, it would be nice to come back together and figure out the progress that's been made. Or so is there a regular conference for the students?
Yeah, these students, the statewide group is getting together every other month throughout the school year. And so they're getting to meet and come together and update each other and update us.
Cool.
And
they always come out to Boston, or do you rotate around the state so people from Pittsfield don't have to drive out to Boston all the time?
Those meetings are usually in Malden with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education.
Oh, okay.
So that the students can kind of be right there in the heart of education. And then the regional meetings are, those will rotate so that they're kind of more geographically accessible.
Okay. Now, is there anything that we haven't discussed that you want to make a point of educating me or educating the audience?
We've touched on quite a bit.
Anything we missed?
I don't think we've missed too much. I guess I would just want to say that, we are really a community-driven entity. We will pretty soon be opening up our applications for people to apply to be on the commission.
Now, is the commission a set number, or does it just depend on the number of qualified applicants that you get?
The maximum is 50.
Okay.
So we have a maximum of 50 members, and about half of those are elected from the general public, which means that anyone can apply to be on the commission.
Okay.
And we especially encourage youth to apply, of course, but we have folks of all ages represented.
Okay.
And we have, we have resources on our website. As I mentioned, we have our very long recommendations list that can kind of inform the public about what we're working on with all of these different agencies. We have our resource map where, we're always looking for feedback and new resource ideas that folks know about in their communities. So I think there's a lot of ways for people to get involved and to help inform the work that we're doing. And so hopefully some of the viewers will be inclined to check us out and contribute in that way.
Okay. Where would you like to see either the commission or the work that the LGBTQ community has been doing? Where do you want to see that going in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, within your lifetime? I don't know, just what direction do you want to see it head?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a tough one. I think that, one thing that I would like to see is, I guess, more, a little bit more consistency around some of this work.
Okay.
I think that right now, we have some schools that do an amazing job with training staff and supporting GSAs, and we have others that are really just in the beginning steps. And so I think, to try to make sure that we're giving every youth in the Commonwealth the opportunity that they deserve, that's kind of definitely a big mandate for us to keep working and working hard to make sure that happens. And I think it kind of speaks to, on the policy level, the need to make sure that we're not letting any youth slip through the cracks because of where they live, what school that they go to.
Great. Well, we are out of time. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I learned a lot, and hopefully I will be able to remember a lot of that. And good luck in your future work, and hopefully
thank you so much.
Will achieve your goals. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and hopefully you appreciated our conversation as much as I have. And I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you around town. Good night.